The fog closed around us like a held breath, and for the first time that morning, I understood the kind of fear that has nothing to do with gunfire or orders. It is the cold, patient kind that sits in the bones and says, quietly, "You are not supposed to be here. Listen to me for 30 seconds. If you ever find yourself stepping off a boat into an island that smells sweet and wrong, turn your back and go." Before we begin, if you want more of these stories that crawl under your skin, hit subscribe and like this video now so you don't miss the full telling. You'll want to see how this one ends. I was a staff sergeant then, young enough to think following orders meant you were safe, old enough to know now that obedience will take you places reason will not. It was 1954, somewhere off the Maine coast in a grey ocean, where gulls kept their distance, and the charts listed Widow's Island in tone, as if the paper itself were reluctant to speak of it. Our orders were simple, the kind of line officers like to hand down. A signal station had gone dark. Check power, verify the shutdown, collect codebook. The paperwork smelled like routine. The world did not. We shoved off before dawn in a small craft that breathed salt and diesel and a slow knocking. I blamed at first on the hull. The knocking settled into a rhythm, a small metal heartbeat under the timber. A petty officer muttered once as we shoved away from the harbor, "That place plays with men's heads." And I laughed out of habit at most things military, but the laugh left me with a taste in my mouth. The crew kept their faces turned toward the wheel while we sat with our packs and radios, checking equipment the way nervous men tidy their hands, and the sea around us lay flat as a sheet, the swells long and lazy like a sleeping beast. The fog closed in as we neared the island, and the world narrowed to the sharp smell that rode the air. Brine mixed with something spoiled and almost sweet like syrup gone bad. It clung to clothing and skin, and the men shifted like it had weight. Lieutenant Consincade briefed us below red light before we left, skin pulled tight over jaw like a man who had learned to command without asking why. He read from his notes and nothing more. The crew were mixed service, and that should have been my first real worry. 8 trained men for a signal check. The petty officer's whisper, the tight way the lieutenant read, the list of names in the envelope, all sat in my gut like small stones I could not spit out. We stepped onto Widow's Pier and the world tightened. The pier boards gave up a small hum beneath our boots, and the ropes hung stiff and pale as if someone had dressed them and walked away. No birds, no smoke, no industry, only low buildings, a tower with rust like bruises. Curtains still shifting in a wind we could not feel. Inside the barracks a mug sat with a thin skin of coffee that kept a residue of warmth, as if someone had only just set it down. Clocks along 2 different walls had stopped on the same minute, and for the life of me I could not explain that detail in any comfortable way. It suggested a pause, not from time, but from something that reached into time and pressed the hand still. We checked radios and the equipment, found power in a room that should not have had it, felt the static press into our heads with a low hiss that sometimes took a pattern like a name. Once, for a blink, the noise formed the beginning of my surname before cracking off into nonsense. The helmsman's face had a twitch he did not own. His compass stuttered once, as if something had leaned a finger toward true north. The island looked smaller from the pier, a flat, dark blot of rock with a few buildings grafted onto it. But the way it existed in the fog made it feel vast, like an animal whose shape you could not get around. We took positions, rationed water and food, and tried to keep reason steady by doing the things soldiers always do. Check gear, count rounds, name the man on your left and the man on your right. The island pushed small things at us, footprints that stopped mid-trail, dents along siding aligned like code, a buoy tapping with the same rhythm as the knocking in the hull, grooves in the sand that belonged to nothing we recognized. Rivas leaned his bar against a rock, and it sat there clean and deliberate magazine, half full, muzzle pointing sky, and no tracks around it, as if someone had set it down and stepped away into the air. Men vanished from time to time in ways that made no sense. O'Hara would leave to check a path and blink back an hour later, with no memory of the time and a watch showing 2 different readings across the group. Jenkins would sit with his rifle and point to dirt that breathed, rising and falling, like a lung under the soil. The fog itself behaved like a curtain, hung around the island to keep it separate. It thickened and thinned at the will of something we could not see, sometimes glowing faint red near the edges, as if the air had a wound. We found a hatch welded into the supply building, thick steel seam blackened, as if it had been closed in a hurry and someone had argued to keep it so. And for reasons I cannot explain, we left it alone for a time until the knocking grew bold enough that the lieutenant, driven by the honest human need to do something, ordered it opened. The hatch gave onto a passage that smelled warmer and fouler than the skinning world above, and when Lewis and I dropped down the passage and the light adjusted, the room beneath the earth breathed like a living thing. Old frames and coils hung from the walls, tarps tucked like folded clothes, notepads packed with careful handwriting about field strength, phase drift, threshold responses, and warnings like resonant zone, avoid extended presence. All dates from tests stood with men's names beside them, and then the most terrible thing, our names. The testing notes recorded Test Group 17, Mixed Combat Unit, unaware subjects with a date that matched our landing and a list of the men on my left and right. For a moment I could not breathe. It was no longer a station. We had been made into instruments, measured against a field that tasted like metal and sea. The array in that chamber thrummed low, and at its center, a pool of black water held the room's reflection, like a coin. The notebook said the field listened when the signal dropped, and that men behaved differently after exposure. One old entry noted sailors walking into the sea and not returning. The coils had the faint glow of something older than electricity, and the walls hummed the same soft knock that had followed us from the boat. The name pattern played again, fragmented, and then the first of what I will not call miracles happened. Lewis walked to the water and stepped in, and the surface swallowed him like paper. No splash, no cry, just smooth, dark swallowing, and his body sank until nothing remained. The hum and the knocking became a chorus of something hungry, and then, blessed God, Jenkins and I wired charges to the main feed and blew the panels hard enough to tear the rhythm. The chamber groaned and the coils collapsed inward. Dust swallowed the lights, and a silence fell like a lid. We climbed up toward the air like men pulling themselves out of a trap, and the fog had likewise thinned, as if whatever held it had relaxed. We made it to the shore at last, and the ocean was the ordinary thing we remember, waves like a metronome, a horizon cut clean. A fishing boat cut through and took us away. Men in rough coats asking few questions as fishermen will, like people who know to keep certain sights on the sea unread. The debriefers on the mainland had the answers already written. We had suffered an accident. The craft we came on had gone down. Several men were listed lost at sea earlier that week, and their names matched ours. Documents were clean, tidy, official. They did not mention the lab below the ground. The notepads, the pool, the knocking that spelled our names, the mugs with cooling stains, the clocks that stopped at the same minute. They never mentioned the sweet, spoiled scent that clung to hands in wet weather. We signed what was asked of us and went home with a silence that sat between us like a promise we could not speak. I have lived a long life since that week on Widow's Island, and the memories did not settle like the rest. Most memories soften, round themselves into stories told at bars and reunions. This one refuses. It remains loose at the edges, as if it wants to move still. I learned the hard way that a field can be built without respect, and that machines that listen will learn languages no one taught them. We were not checking a radio tower. We were a part of an experiment that had outlived its makers. The island had patterns and pulses. It learned our names like a child learning to call a parent, and when it made a choice about what it wanted, it reached down and took pieces of us. That is the truth stripped of the uniforms and the reports. There are other truths. How the smell will make you feel faint and odd and sleepless. How a clock stops to keep you from noticing time passing. How a shoreline can seem ordinary, and then not at all. And how men in charge choose tidy explanations because messy ones are harder to own. People have asked me why I did not fight the reports, why I did not tear open the file and demand an inquiry. It would have been like pulling at a loose thread on a deep garment. Those who control narratives do not like questions that lead back to experiments that should never have happened. The official line made it a storm, a landslide of the mind, some misfortune. I kept my book of notes tucked beneath my mattress for years, the pages filled with measured paces, odd compass readings, and the coil hum that matched my heartbeat sometimes when the night turned damp. Every so often, on a night when the pipes creak like a distant drum and the house breathes in a way that makes the lights dim, I will hear a tapping that is too regular to be just cooling metal. It feels like a memory in the house's bones, and I do not pretend it is anything else. If you listen to nothing else I say, remember this. People who build machines that reach into the human mind rarely stop at what they meant to make. The island learned and it took. If you find yourself near fog that tastes wrong, if clocks stop and mugs keep a trace of warmth, turn your back and go. For me, the greatest wound was not the men who did not return, nor the official erasure, but the fact that a place had learned enough to keep calling names after we left. I have tried to make peace with what I saw. Some nights I convince myself it was a field miscalibrated, a scientific mistake too big for explanation. Other nights I know it was older than machinery, that the equipment only taught it how to speak back in a tune we could hear. Either way, the verdict is the same. Widow's Island remembers. It remembers the men it called, and it remembers when it had us in its mouth. That remembrance is patient. If you like this account, and you want more stories dredged from quiet corners where orders and rumor meet, subscribe, share, and click through to the full narration on this channel. There are others like this one, and they tend to linger in the spine if you let them. Be careful where curiosity carries you. Some places listen, and once they learn your name, they do not often forget.